two things that people are purchasing that are crap and some things that people aren't purchasing that they should. People overinvest in equipment and cattle. They underinvest in land and cash. Those are things that are very difficult to get through people's head. The other thing that they don't invest in, which is this is probably a list of people, things that they should have a good agronomist hired. They should have a good risk manager hired. They should have a financial advisor hired. And these are things that whenever you talk about what it takes to run an operation, these are where we dial in efficiencies and we start really building some kind of plan and security going forward. And instead, we're too busy focusing on the immediate gratification of buying pieces of equipment or the buzz that you get from walking into the sale barn with a new load of cattle. Those are things that don't contribute to long-term wealth, don't improve our succession and estate planning, and then ultimately are the things that lead to bankruptcy, period. You want to point to assets that lead to bankruptcy, over investing in freaking equipment and cattle will do it every single time. That's why custom operators struggle to survive. It's because equipment is not a good asset. They spend a ton of money keeping it up, buying new ones, rolling it out. Cattle, look how many cow-calf operators have gone out of business in the last 10 to 20 years. It's an extremely volatile market. It's hard to gauge, and it's not something that should be a half-hearted effort in any operation. It usually is. The cattle sector is divided up into the packers, the feeders, the stockers, and then the cow-calf operations. The interesting thing is that the industries that are the easiest to get into are usually the easiest to go bankrupt in. Very reactionary markets. And usually the worst operators are the ones that go buy cattle. I actually did a break-even analysis over the last 10 years. 3 out of the last 10 years using today's cost of production would have been profitable, and for very short periods of time. So here's the problem with cattle is that Hollywood's the problem with cattle because all of our great Western movies involve people driving cattle from Texas to Montana or Montana to Texas or from the east to the west. And we become romanticized with cattle. And we think that part of our identity in agriculture, some people really feel that they cannot be producers unless they are raising livestock. But that tells me a lot that they're a really poor business person because they're emotionally attached to a business asset and cannot make sound, unbiased decisions. And that's extremely scary place to be in. They have to understand what they're getting involved in. And that's one of the things that I wrote down, like farmers don't realize that their primary profession is investing, not farming. And I mentioned that. And it's like, you've got to be able to invest in the right assets and understanding those. And cattle are different. Like when people think cattle, they think I'm talking about dairy cattle, stockers, and feeders and stuff. What I'm specifically talking about is cow-calf operations because that's where the greatest number of active participants are in right now. We've seen mass consolidation in the cattle industry to where we have like 4 major packers in this country. So we've allowed an oligopoly to form. And really and truly, they tell the feeders what they can actually pay. The feeders tell the stockers what they can pay, and the stockers tell the cow-calf guy what they can pay. And so the old comment shit rolls downhill. Well, guess who's at the bottom of the hill? It's the cow-calf producer. And so they're always the one that's trying to trudge through that and get air and move up into a point of profitability. But the system itself is now built to work against them. And so if these people don't figure out a way to start managing that risk, the cow-calf sector that we know today is not going to exist in another 25 years. What's going to happen is that the packers are going to decide it's easier just to own the feed yards. Feed yards are going to decide just like they did when we had that huge cattle shortage, it's easier for them to own the cattle. And then the cow-calf guys are going to just eventually get worked out through this process. And so that's the direction we're headed. And here we are still in this emotional state that I'm not an ag producer unless I own cattle. No, you're not an ag producer when you go bankrupt. That's when you're not an ag producer. And the best way to do that is overspend on equipment and overspend on cattle with no freaking plan to get through it just because you have an identity crisis that you can't get through. They should understand they should have people employed as part of their team, not just their direct team, not people that work for them for a direct paycheck. I'm talking about crop insurance people. I'm talking about livestock hedging services. I'm talking about financial advisors, a good CPA, which that's hard to find. people that they can advise to help them understand what investments are good ones. The funny thing is that most farmers are invested in one of the best asset classes ever, if not arguably the best asset class, which is land. But instead, we talk about we got to buy equipment to do this, we got to buy cattle to stock this up. Guys, I'm going to tell you right now, you'd be better off forfeiting that and just going and stretching to buy some land, sticking it on your books, and finding a way to survive from year to year. And in another 20 or 30 years, that land's going to continue to appreciate. Global population's going up, production standards are going up. We're having more demand on our food systems than ever. We have the craziest, weirdest hippie movements that have caused problems with our entire food system. Whenever we talk organics and natural and local, which I understand there's some beneficial things that people feel that are beneficial. The reality, though, is that contracts our food supply and once again puts more pressure on the demand for the current food and in turn makes the land worth more money. If people would get out of the mindset that I've got to own cattle because I'm not an ag producer if I don't, and start looking for ways to invest in either land or put their money in some very high interest earning saving system, they would be better off and actually have something to show for all their work in the next 25 to 50 years. But most people won't do that. Most people will go listen to the wrong people. They're going to listen to some cattle buyer who's got his own incentives. They're going to go listen to some neighbor down the road that's just talking out of his rear end. And they're going to decide to go buy a bunch of cattle and stick it on a bunch of leased land. And then in a couple of years, when the market completely craters because we've oversupplied it again, just like after 2015, they'll be out of business. But unfortunately, at this point, they're going to have the weight of a bankruptcy or foreclosure on top of their head, which makes reinvesting and getting back in the business harder than it ever has. It's not that I don't love cattle. I love cattle. I mean, I'm just like every other ag way. I look at them and there's some kind of romanticism that comes down into me as well. And I have livestock on my own, but the reality is I'm not counting on that livestock to make me income. It's a training ground for my kids to learn responsibility. And those have different benefits. I think anything that anybody gets involved in, they need to have an objective of why they're getting involved in. I think people buy equipment and buy cattle because it's an emotional response and they'll find some way to justify it in their mind. And then when they get back and they start pushing the numbers to it, which by the way is backwards, you should be pushing the numbers on it before then go and buying it. They're going to realize they've got themselves in a workout situation. Then they're going to go to their banker and justify what they did. And their banker's going to read right through that every single time. And then if you've got a good banker that believes in your family, understands your operation, they'll do your best to get you set back on your feet. But if you don't, if you do nothing and just rinse and repeat and go right back down the same path, at some point, you'll lose all the advocates you have for your business. And then that is when you're in a scary spot. That's when you can't find financing. That's when you can't find people that want to work with you on your insurance or your risk management because you're a poor business person. You're a poor investor and you're a bad bet. You don't want to be a bad bet. And you get tagged with that, every banker talks in the area. And then eventually what happens is you can't find financing and you're forced to sell things and find ways to work out debt that you didn't really ever want to have or should have had in the first place. I could go on and on about this topic, and I get very emotionally charged when I think about this because where I'm coming from is I see a path through numbers. And because of that, I see that most people are not taking the proper steps to protect their family legacy. And there's nothing more important to me in my role, in my day to day life, than protecting the farming legacy that we have here in this country and in other countries. And when I see this happen, I realize that there are still people that aren't going to be here tomorrow. There are going to people that aren't going to be able to pass that land on. And I think about the sweat and the blood that was put into those operations to get them to this point. And it's almost like a death. It's a tragedy. It's losing a piece of who we are, a piece of our identity as Americans when we lose an American farming business. And so I would encourage you guys to think differently, first and foremost. Look at your business differently. Encourage you to understand that you're an investor and that in order to stay in business, you got to make wise investment decisions that ultimately grow your worth. And if you have trouble doing that, we got a great team here that can help you. You just got to click the link below and take that next step.